part of what needs to happen is the whole beauty of doing this live is that we can engage and have discussion, right? And so what I want you to do, and I will randomly assign two presentations to you, and then you will respond to those questions to that individual in the discussion, and I will have access to that. We will all have access to that information, okay? So you will be assigned to two people. You're going to upload your presentation in the discussion board. So I'll set that up. It'll be in the discussion board. So everyone will have access to your presentation, but you will be assigned for grading purposes to just two. And you'll give feedback on their presentation based on the questions. Thanks for asking that. Okay. Yeah, it'd be great for you to look at everyone's. If you have that luxury and the time, the interest, go for it, do that. But I'll create a discussion for you to upload your presentation and for you to have some dialogue.
When will the comments, so our presentations will all be due on Tuesday next week, and then when would the comments be due?
The comments will be due at the following week at the same time.
Okay.
Right before class, you have 1 week to do it.
And I have a question about, I have a question about references. Do you want it in certain like format or links? Is that fine?
Hyperlinks are fine.
Okay.
I'm a hyperlinks kind of guy. That whole classic traditional APA stuff. And I'm an academic, but I think it's time for us to modernize how we reference. So I'm all for hyperlinks. That makes it so much easier.
I had a question regarding the timing.
Yes.
I know that it's supposed to be for 8 minutes. So do you still want us to keep it at that 8-minute stopping point? And then for that as well, do the questions count in that? So like once we get to the questions portion, we ask the 3 questions. Does that have to be within the 8-minute portion?
Yeah, I would say 5 to 8 minutes is a good ballpark time for your entire presentation since we're doing it virtually.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you happen to have a 4-minute presentation and you knock it out the box, that's wonderful. But I just don't know if you can truly, capture the scope of what you're expected to capture in a very short period of time, right? But if you have some way of doing it, I would be really impressed.
Is it okay if for example, if it was like a little bit over 8 minutes, like just like a tad bit?
I mean, that's fine, but if it's like 12 minutes, we have a problem.
Oh, no.
Yeah,
it's not, it's not like that long.
Yeah, if it's like 8 minutes and 10 seconds or 8 minutes and 30 seconds or even 9 minutes, that's fine. But try not to go past that. Okay. Well, I apologize. Life is crazy. There's so much happening. And I appreciate your flexibility. We're not off the hook because I do have a backup plan for class. I was like, what if the class does want to do virtual? Then what are you going to do? This is a timely moment for me to share with you my lecture on racial equity in healthcare. I don't think I've done that with you in this class, right? No? Okay. It's very timely given where we are. This is a moment of inflection for this country. And it just feels like the right thing to do. Does it nicely dovetail into strategic planning and marketing? It's not an intuitive association, but it is important for us to apply racial equity concepts in strategic planning and marketing. So I would argue that this is a relevant topic for this course. I don't typically include it, but I think I should moving forward. I'd love to get your feedback. So just take a stretch break for about a minute and let me pull up my slide deck, and then I will move forward. And I would say for planning purposes, we should be done by 8:30 at the latest for your own planning if you need to do something. Okay, so I'll be back in about 2 minutes. Okay, I am ready when you all are back and settled. So I'm going to share a slide deck with you. What I'll do tonight is an abbreviated version that's non-scripted. This is a very scripted presentation, but for this class, I'm just going to talk to you about the content in the slides. And I want you to think about, you know, what we've covered in this course and the importance of integrating racial equity concepts in health systems performance. And so I will talk a little bit about what that means and provide some examples for you. All right, so, and I'll put the slides in the in Canvas so you'll have them, but these are just some of my publications. And if you're interested in learning more about any of these, just let me know and I can get them to you. Whoops, did hyperlinks again. All right. So I think we're familiar. If you're not, this is a quote that you know you should know, particularly in you're pursuing a degree in health administration and you are in a school of public health. Of all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And those were the words of Martin Luther King Jr. So basically what I want to do is take a moment to reflect on our history, reflect on our current environment and where we need to go as an industry. Okay, so this presentation is really designed around healthcare of the future and what needs to be done to increase health equity, racial equity, to ensure that all people, regardless of their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, immigration, citizenship status, have access to high quality care. But for this presentation, I should focus, I'm just really focusing on racial equity. So it's important to note that healthcare is a microcosm of a broader society that is riddled with racial injustice. So healthcare itself is not impermeable. We have our own problems that we have to deal with. Racial diversity at all levels is not the panacea, right? So some people think that, oh, wow, we just need more people of color in leadership positions. We need more doctors of color. We need more nurses in color. We need more people in positions of power. Yes, that is true. And there's lots of evidence to suggest that. But we know that the forces are much larger than the people themselves. And so to resolve this issue, it requires us to be intentional. It requires us to conduct critical audits of how we do our work. And what about our past has created norms that we become very comfortable with, that we don't realize that we are disenfranchising populations or providing some populations with more benefits than others. All of us are susceptible to implicit bias, and Black and Brown people have a very, very complicated relationship with the institution of healthcare. And if we need an example, just look at COVID-19 and vaccine hesitancy. So I argue, my friends, that we have not cracked the code on the delivery of healthcare. We do medical care really, really well, but we have not cracked the code on healthcare when we talk about the delivery of health services. Our system is so focused on the biology, treating of the illness, and we're rewarded financially when people get sick, right? But what about prevention? And if we're going to prevent disease, we have to focus on public health and what's happening in the community. And do people have the basic resources that are necessary for us to live healthy, meaningful, productive lives? So we have quite a ways to go. And I share this slide just to put it in context for you. You can see that clinical care, well, if we look at the factors that shape our health, we know that clinical care represents a very small percentage of what shapes your health and the health of your community. The rest is driven by social and economic factors, the physical environment, and health behaviors. Health behaviors are commonly correlated with social and economic factors. For example, we know there are trends in between level of education and likelihood to be a smoker, right? So that's an example of that correlation that we see. So we know that education is key. And if we really want to improve the health of the world, let's make sure that every child has access to a high quality education. And we would make a it'll make a major difference. Okay, so I want you to sit back and unpack this for a minute. This is a very powerful, powerful image that shows you that we are just, if you look at this timeline, and if we use 1619 as a starting point, when you do the math, it's about 83% of the time, slavery was legal in this country, segregation was legal, policies and practices that reinforce slavery and segregation were normalized in this country. I would argue that we're not in the green. So this is this image is frequently referenced in the literature. And actually if you're interested in working with me, I'd like to recreate this image that is much more reflective of our reality. I like it because it gives us something to think about, but I say we are not in the green yet. Let me tell you why I argue we're not in the green. And I want to take that little green sliver and make it maybe like another shade. Because green means, oh, it's all over. We're good. Everything's perfect. The world is perfect. Kumbaya. Well, we're celebrating right now something that we shouldn't be celebrating, right? I mean, a trial. I mean, we all saw what happened on that video, and it should be not even this shouldn't even be a point of discussion or deliberation. And this is just one person, this is one case, and this has been happening in this country for centuries. And the only reason it's getting the recognition now is because of social media, because of these wonderful devices that are capturing these events in real time. And so this is not new. And folks who are in denial or just have not been woke to these issues, those folks realize that this is not new. So I say we're not in the green because there's still voter suppression issues we're dealing with. There's mass incarceration issues we're dealing with. There's the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and the Ahmaud Arbery's and Dante, all these folks, and these are names that we know. There's probably 50 to 100 times more people that their names that we will never know. So we're not in the green. What's important to note is it's going to take a long time to undo this damage, a very long time. Extinction does not occur overnight. It is a process that takes time. Health disparities, racial inequality has a price tag. Right now in this country, we're spending $3.6 trillion on healthcare. That is a lot of money when you look at our spending compared to other industrialized countries. And that's what this graph shows here. The vertical axis shows life expectancy, right? And so the bottom, you can see 65, it goes all the way up to 85. The horizontal axis shows you spending per capita, right? And you can see that we, the lovely United States, is almost literally off the charts. We're spending a heck of a lot more than other industrialized countries, and our life expectancy is among the lowest. Something is not right with our system, and it is not the healthcare delivery system. Well, the healthcare delivery system is a partial driver for these expenses, but inequality is a key driver for the costs that we are incurring in this country. So it has a price tag. And I would argue that every person needs to take this seriously, regardless of your race, regardless of your income, regardless of where you are on the socioeconomic ladder, because this country cannot reach its fullest potential when a large swath of its citizens are disadvantaged because of a system that is riddled with injustice. So it's very simple, yet very complex to fix. On the left, you can see inequitable conditions, right? And that's just when people or communities just do not have equal access to opportunity across the lifespan. So if you have one population north of Main Street and the other population south of Main Street, those communities are very, very different. You're going to see measurable differences in health outcomes. You're going to see differences in disease incidence. You're going to see differences in prevalence of disease, mortality, and morbidity. And again, it costs a lot of money. These two texts altered my career trajectory 20 years ago. On the left, you can see unequal treatment. Has anyone heard of unequal treatment? Okay, now you have. I'm so glad. This lets me know that I'm making a difference in your level of knowledge, which is important because these are landmark publications that anyone who is in the healthcare space needs to know. Unequal treatment was released in the 2000s, and it was landmark because it is a compendium of studies, peer-reviewed investigations that tell the story that even when we when we control for factors like when we control for income, education, insurance status, we still see differences in patients' experiences and patients' outcomes by race. Let me simplify this. If you have a person who's making $100,000 a year, you have two people with the same demographics, right? They both make $100,000 a year. They both have the same type of insurance. They both have the same level of education. Studies show that there's still going to be a difference in that patient's experience, and what's left is race. So there's something that we're dealing with that needs to be addressed. And I would argue that people are not intentionally making intentionally egregious mistakes, or the people aren't coming to work to do harm. They really are coming to work to do their best each and every day. But what we're dealing with is a system that is, again, riddled with injustice. We're all swimming in it each and every day, and we do not realize it's happening. And we can make decisions that are harmful to patients. On the right is medical apartheid. It's Harriet Washington is the author of this. And this is a story, not a story, it's actually, it speaks to the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present. So we've heard about Tuskegee. Some of you have heard about Henrietta Lacks, and there's just a lot of others. But this story, this book just gives examples of how this was very common in this country for so long. And again, this is the institution of medical care. And we still see vestiges of fallacies, biological fallacies in practice today. It's 2021. I'll share a few examples with you. This book here, Medical Apartheid, is a very difficult read because it's very raw, it's very real. There's pictures and images, and I couldn't read it all in one sitting. I had to take time, and I had to be mentally prepared to go into this dark space. But I think it's part of the work that we have to do as a country if we really want to address these issues that we're experiencing around race. It's important for us to know our history, and we will be much more productive in our work. We'll be much more productive citizens, and we will be role models for those that we love and care about, and those who are in our communities. I'll come back to medical treatment and medical apartheid in just a moment. But one thing that we do in our work is we listen to people's experiences in healthcare. And what we've created are profiles based on common themes that we've heard from people of color around their healthcare experiences. And I'm going to share their profiles with you just to get to stimulate some thinking. This is Otis. Otis says, they asked me a lot of questions about my pain. I think they assumed I was seeking drugs. Rashida, obesity and diabetes, they run in her family. In the beginning, she felt like her providers thought she was lazy and didn't care about her health. Maria, my doctor tells me to eat healthy, but it's difficult. The grocery store is far away. The foods I can obtain, well, they're not very healthy, but they're affordable. This is my local grocery store. Anam says, I am Muslim. English is my second language. I feel like they think I'm not smart. Solomon, I don't connect with anything in my doctor's office, from the pamphlets to the magazines to the team that cares for me. No one looks like me. So just ponder on how these narratives relate to patient engagement, patients as partners in the care that they're receiving, because high quality care requires the patient to be actively involved and the patient to be part of the goal setting for his or her treatment plan, right? Or, whatever it is that they need to do to stay well, we want to set goals. And if we don't have patients who are engaged, deeply engaged, and having meaningful relationships with their providers, we're compromising what we're trying to do. So just, think about that. So systemic racism, right? What is it? I do racial healing sessions with people around this topic, all people, Black people, white people, it doesn't matter what the race, ethnicity is. I just love getting diverse people in a room to talk about these issues because it's important. And again, I maintain that most people are good. Most people want to do the right thing and be really good people in this world. But the challenge is the world in which we live, what we have inherited, has caused us to, perpetuate some of the issues, and we don't even realize that we're doing it. So that's why we talk about systemic. I like to talk about systemic racism, not personal individual work. Those aren't the people I'm interested in hanging out with, right? Those are the people who are very explicit and they believe that they are superior. I'm not talking about those people. That's a very small percentage of people. I'm talking about regular people who really want to understand these issues and do better. Those are the folks that I like to get in the room, right? And so when we're in the room together, we talk about the system. We talk about the economic system, the education system, healthcare, criminal justice, and how those systems have originated through racial ideology or racialized ideology. And how does that show up today in practice? And how do we conduct critical audits to catch ourselves to undo this damage? So let's talk about healthcare. That's what we're here for, right? So medical apartheid reminds us that, Blacks were originally perceived to be inferior, genetically different, unintelligent, having thicker skin, possessing a higher pain tolerance, and being predisposed to violence. These beliefs, these biological fallacies is what they're called, were institutionalized in the evolution of the American healthcare system. This is how the system was born, developed, engineered, right? Again, we do not eradicate this overnight. You can't eradicate it in a generation. It's 2021 and we're still seeing treatment, differences in treatment based on race. This study was done in 2016. It was conducted by a researcher out of Princeton. Hoffman is her name, and her colleagues. And she wanted to know, do med students have perceptions around, biological differences between Blacks and whites? And what they found was yes. You can see all of these listed here, but the two I want to highlight are the ones that were the most common, and that's that Black skin is thicker than whites, and Black people's blood coagulates more quickly than whites. Again, it's 2021, and we still have these perceptions. What in the world? Were they taught this? Or was it implicitly was it implied in their training and education? And I would argue the latter, that it was implicitly referenced in some way, shape, or form in their training or education or textbooks that they read as they prepared for med school. It came from somewhere. They didn't just make it up, right? So this is heavy. And this speaks to why we see variation in patient experiences and patient outcomes by race and ethnicity. So pinpointing inequity in the ecosystem. So what I have here, just to reinforce the point that we are not, the healthcare system is not impermeable to what's happening in the broader ecosystem. We are a contributor, and we also have to deal with the aftermath. We have to deal with the aftermath of injustice, right? When I go into an ER in the District of Columbia, I'm more likely to see people of color in the ER. Fact. Okay. So that is the healthcare systems. That's we have to address that. And a lot of times these folks are in the ER for conditions that could have been prevented. They're in the ER because of a condition that has gotten out of control, or it's a late stage diagnosis. And why is that? It's because of the broader community and what's happening in the environment. There's probably inequality in housing, or issues with housing, disparities in housing, disparities in education, disparities in employment options, right? And that impacts health. But we have also been a part of the problem because of different ways that patients are treated by race, ethnicity once they enter our systems, and their access, right? Because we know that people who are lower income, who have not had the same level of access to opportunity, are more likely to have Medicaid, right? In this area, you're going to see more people of color who are on Medicaid. And we know that Medicaid reimbursement rates are not the same as private insurance. So the providers aren't getting paid as much. So there you're going to see some challenges. And there's some providers who don't accept Medicaid. So that's an access barrier. So not only are we, that we have to treat patients once they've fallen off the cliff. That's a great way to think about it, right? They have fallen off the cliff. They need us because they've really gotten to a point where they end up in the ER, right? Because of a broader issue. And then we have our own issues and things that we do as a healthcare industry that perpetuate the problem. So when we have a system, an ecosystem that's unjust, we're going to see it play out in preventable hospitalization. We're going to see higher admission rates. We're going to see late chronic disease diagnosis, premature death, even crime and social ills. When folks don't have hope, when they have been if they've had for generations lived in a certain neighborhood, and that neighborhood is just not a healthy place to live, you lose hope. Your value for life is compromised. Therefore, you see crime. We experience crime and all kinds of other social ills. Premature mental health issues and lost productivity. So we cannot eradicate racial disparities in health without intentional efforts to dismantle systemic racism. I think we all are familiar with some of the statues that are coming down all across the country. I'm at Georgetown. We've actually just changed the name of 2 of our buildings because they were associated with the names, or the families of these individuals were slave owners. And so those statues have come down. But these are just statues that I just took pictures of. I pulled some photos of folks from the Confederacy that have been hailed as heroes in our history. So just think about what this means for people of color, right? It's like, wow, there's statues erected. We celebrate folks who have really wanted us to be oppressed people of color to be oppressed and not have access to opportunity. and they're celebrated in the history book. So it's a very complicated, it's very complicated for people of color to grow up and go be in history classes, and we're hearing about these folks, but yet we know because of our own education, what our family members have taught us, that, wow, they're celebrating this, but look, this is what it really means for us. And it makes things very, very difficult. Leads to tension, depression, you know, feeling that the country is not reflective of, you know, this country is not applying its founding values for everybody. It just applies to some. How do you navigate a life when this is your reality? And then you see on the TV injustices each and every day. It's a lot of weight to carry. So this is a statue. This is a statue of James Merriam Sims. Anyone familiar with that name? No? Okay. So James, this is a statue, and this is held in the medical textbooks as the father of gynecology. And without Dr. Sims and all of his research, we would not know a lot about women's health that we know today. So he has been celebrated and held as a hero in medicine. But this is just another picture of him. But what we don't know, and what's not taught, is the stories of Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy. Please never forget these names. Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy were enslaved women. And James Merriam Sims used their bodies to experiment on how to correct vaginal fistulas. Again, this is the same person who is celebrated as the father of gynecology. So we have our own baggage in healthcare. And actually, if you're a nursing student, you've probably read, well, I know you're not a nursing student, but nursing students are taught to put the patient in Sims' position. I'll never forget, I was telling this story to a group of nurses, and they had an aha moment and their mouths were dropped. And I was like, and I didn't know about the Sims position, so they taught me. I said, why were you so like, wow, when I said this person's name? And they said, well, we are always taught in nursing school to put the patient in Sims' position. Now we know the history of it. Sims' position is the position that you put the patient in if you're going to give the patient an enema. Okay, so yeah, it's just one example of how Black and brown bodies were used to advance the practice of medicine. Unethical, unconsensual, painful, immoral, and this has an intergenerational impact on families. So let me give you an example of a tone-deaf moment. There was a CEO, and CEOs of hospitals and health systems they really are trying. The ones that I'm working with really are trying to tackle these issues with their employee populations, because they recognize that many of their employees of color are really going through it right now. And we talk about the George Floyd and the killings of Black and brown people, but you know, I'm going back to, you know, when we had the Trump administration inaugurated, right? It has been, the past 5 years have just been like, wow, all this is just in your face. So we are seeing more and more leaders really trying. So I was working with a CEO. CEO is a white male who is in his, I'd say probably upper 50s. And I've applauded him for really taking, you know, rolling up his sleeves and really trying to listen to employees and create a workforce that recognizes these dynamics and so forth. So this is what he did. after learning about Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy. He put up a flyer and he wanted to do a 1-hour session. And what he said was, we want to celebrate Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy's contribution to medicine. Okay, we want to celebrate their contribution to medicine. The Black employees, the employees of color, had a really, really, really difficult time with that language, right? Why are we celebrating their contributions to medicine when they were not asked, when they were required to do this, when they were in pain? It was a very tone deaf attempt to do something to right a wrong, right? That is an example of why we need to have diversity, because it was the people in his trusted circle, because he has one of his vice presidents is a Black researcher, and she approached him and said, this is a tone deaf flyer. I understand your point, but we can't say that we want to celebrate these women's contribution to medicine. Okay. So that's just an example of how things, and it was crisis averted. I'm so glad it didn't go out. But this is an example of why we need to have diversity in our circles. A perfect example. But get this, due to public outcry, in 2018, this statue was removed. So it is no longer there. And you know, you've heard about the high rates of maternal mortality. Rachel, hi. Yes, I see your hand.
Oh yeah, I had a quick question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Regarding the previous example you gave, I don't know if this is something you know, but like, do any like schools, I guess, of medicine or nursing or other health professions, like, are there like anti-racism courses, or like, is that incorporated? Like, do people learn about like Betsy and these other women, or no?
That has not been the case, Rachel. Thanks for asking that question. Let me tell you, if you want to learn about Anarcha, Betsy, and Lucy, historically, you would have to be a student at an HBCU.
Gotcha.
The predominantly white institutions will probably gloss over it, not notice it, and celebrate James Merriam Sims, right? But we're seeing more, and a lot of this is being led by the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC, which is the accrediting body for med schools. So they are putting in accreditation metrics around ensuring that these concepts are taught. Thanks for asking that question.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So you've all heard about maternal mortality rates in Black women, you know, Black women dying either before they give birth, during birth, or after their baby. 1 year, they'll die 1 year before their baby's first birthday. What's that all about, right? And so experts argue that it can be traced back to James Merriam Sims' teaching. I mean, he was very, very influential in gynecological training, very influential. And so the argument is that, you know, his teachings and his approaches continue to exist in protocols and the way that people learn. And I would argue that is probably part of what we're dealing with, you know, because women are saying their doctors are not listening to them, they're not being heard. Serena Williams, Beyonce had similar narratives. And we all know, you should know about the Tuskegee study, 1932. These 400 Black men had syphilis. They were not treated for it. This was a federal study, so it was government endorsed, supported, and the whole goal was to see what happens if we don't treat syphilis. What happens to the human body? And so that was the motive. So these men thought they were being treated, but they were not being treated. And the treatment would have just been penicillin. So there was a treatment at that time for syphilis. 400 Black men. And then Henrietta Lacks, the cells, and this is, she was being treated for cancer, cervical cancer at Johns Hopkins. Her cells were extracted and immortalized. She did not give consent for all this. Through her cells, we now know more about how to treat cancer, AIDS, HIV/AIDS, polio, and the human genome, right? I mean, there's so much that we know now as a result of these cells. And one of the things that we know, thanks to the Human Genome Project, is race. So many of us hypothesized this, but this was the proof. Race is not real. It is a social construct. Again, race is a social construct that was developed to disenfranchise, to oppress people of color. And there was no remuneration for Henrietta Lacks and what happened to her. This helps explain why people of color have issues with healthcare, the healthcare delivery system, vaccinations, clinical trials, and all the above. So here's some examples of how we address these issues. I just gave you a very, very quick crash course on some of the history, but now let's talk about moving forward. And we'll start, I have an example of each bubble and then we'll be done. So one thing that we have to do is apply best practice in real data collection. Are you familiar with real data collection? It's an acronym. It stands for race, ethnicity, and language. So we want to be sure that we are collecting data based on race, ethnicity, and language. And it's not as easy as one may think, right? You know, I can't tell you how many times folks in the health system have reached out to us because they want us to look at some disparities data, and we look at their data and they don't have a lot of their race, ethnicity, and language fields are left blank because the patient didn't check it. And so we can't do much with their data. But it's important to have that data. So there are best practices around collecting data about race, ethnicity, and language. And guess what people told us in our focus groups why they don't? And it makes so much sense. Why they don't like to check the box. We don't know why you're asking us those questions. Why do you need to know that? That's what they said. We feel very uncomfortable asking those questions because we think that if we answer it, and we think if we can answer that question, it can impact how we receive care in a negative way. So what we've done and what we advise hospitals and health systems to do, or anyone who's collecting data about race, ethnicity, and language, is to be proactive and explain to the patient why this is important, and that it is not being used for anything beyond your. It's not being conducted for anything that's going to result in a difference in how your care is rendered. Standardized social factors in the electronic health record. Basically, we need to expand what we're capturing, look at housing, housing instability, food insecurity, exposure to violence. These are factors that are important for us to integrate in the electronic health record. And we also need to have community-based organizations that can help us ensure that patients' holistic needs are met in real time. And of course, workforce and diversity metrics. We need to always, and this goes back to planning. So you can do planning for the institution, and then each functional area can have a plan. So HR typically has its own plan, right? And part of that plan is looking at the diversity of the population that you're treating or your consumer, Match that with the diversity of your workforce. And when you are underrepresented, when some populations are underrepresented in your workforce, you build a strategy to level things out. So you have that nice match between your consumers and your workforce. So that's part of what happens in planning in the HR space. There's a study that was done a few years ago. It got a lot of press. Are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? A field experiment on labor market discrimination. Very simply, all that was done was they responded to, in this research, the researchers responded to job descriptions, job announcements, and they left the resumes the same, the exact same, and all they did was change the name. And Emily and Greg were more likely to receive a call back for an interview than Lakeisha and Jamal. So what is that? That could be explicit, meaning that folks were aware of what they were doing, or it could be implicit, that they were not aware of what they were doing when they were making these decisions. So I've had some organizations that I've worked with, they've decided that they take off names of resumes. They just don't even, they remove the name before they send it to the hiring manager. Some organizations even remove the address because some folks may have a bias based on where someone lives. It's unfortunate that that's what some organizations are doing to promote equity, but it's a Band-Aid approach. But there obviously this suggests there are much deeper issues that need to be tackled. Brigham and Women's Hospital, they've been doing some really good work trying to become much more reflective of the populations that they serve. Here's what when they did their environmental scan. So we tell organizations, do an environmental scan, literally walk through your organization, look at the pictures, look at the magazines, look at how you're communicating information to patients. Is it culturally nuanced? Does it reflect their identity? And so this was their first stop. It's like, oh my goodness, wow, this is the amphitheater. This is what we see here, okay? How is it supposed to make patients feel? How is it supposed to make your diverse employee population feel? Typically the amphitheater is where you go when you have trainings and you're listening to lectures and presenters. And so if you are striving for diversity and you see all of these images of folks that don't reflect the population that you're serving, you're going to have a more difficult time connecting with patients. And you're not going to, it's going to be more difficult to build trust with patients of color. So what they did was they removed the portraits. And instead of having them all clustered in one space, they distributed them throughout the institution, and they made sure that they had other images that were reflective of the population. I need to get a picture. I need to have a friend, I need to call her and see if she can send me a picture of the new and improved, because I'd like to see that. But this made the news, and so that's why I captured it. And I was telling you earlier that race is a social construct, but unfortunately, we still see clinical decision-making based on this variable, race. We see it in these algorithms, and it's disadvantaging people of color. So race is not a biological risk factor. Let me give you another example. This is the District of Columbia. In the District of Columbia, out of every 4 deaths, 3 individuals are Black in the District of Columbia. Are these people dying because they're Black? No, they're not dying because they're Black. Well, indirectly they are, but anyway, they're dying because of social and environmental conditions that increase their risk for being infected with the virus. And if they are infected, they are highly susceptible to, they're more likely to have a more difficult time of weathering the virus. So it's not because of them being Black, it's because of the social environmental conditions in which they live, learn, and operate. So what I tell med students, Rachel, when they come to me after my talks and they say, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times I've had a lecture or had a case study and we were so focused on race. And I'll tell them, you know, anytime you have a faculty member that says, you know, this happened because a patient is Black, that should immediately raise your antennae and trigger your thoughts around what does that mean? It's not because they're Black, it's because of something else that is related to their Blackness, right? So, so it is a surrogate marker. It could be a surrogate marker, a proxy. It could be a predictor, but it is not causal. People aren't experiencing more disease solely because of their Black. It's other issues that are controllable. Caring for the whole patient. So we do these learning journeys, right? And that's when we take providers, clinicians, board members, administrators into communities, into neighborhoods, and they literally sit in people's homes and they listen to their stories. This is a story of Shanika James. It made headline news a few years ago. This was her apartment complex, and her landlord, the management company, just would take these folks' rent and not, you know, ensure that these conditions were up to code, and they got away with it for a long time. This is important because if Shanika has a child or Shanika has asthma, whatever, this is the root cause of could be the root cause of her asthma development or the root cause of triggers that he or she may have or her child may have. And so if we're talking about healthcare, if we're talking about population health, we must factor this in, right? So for so long, Shanika would just go to her doctor would keep giving her medication to treat whatever the issue was for the day. But this is the core of the problem right here. This is the root of the problem. So as a healthcare provider, it's important for me, or if I'm an insurer, right? It makes a lot of sense for me to really, really address this issue and help her address this issue. So what happens? We have legal teams now working in healthcare. So you have medical legal partnerships that are co-located in primary care provider offices. So these are lawyers who address these types of injustices. And so in this case, one of the attorneys may have started with a letter to the management company, and that was enough, and the work was done. They started the work that was necessary to improve these living conditions. Sometimes it takes a lot more. But we're seeing more and more medical legal partnerships because we know that some people are unhealthy because because of exploitation or because of some other issue that is illegal. Let's go with, very quickly, I just want to talk about COVID. And I'd love to get your thoughts. When we talk about the vaccine and the different barriers, it really comes down to four issues. One, limited universal supply, and we're seeing that become less of an issue with increased distribution. But the other is just inequitable distribution logistics, where we have some communities making access easier and more available than other communities. And then we have hesitancy. I know some folks have a difficult time with that language, but the bottom line is you have some people who are just not quick to take the vaccine. Use whatever word you want to use, but that's another bucket. And then the anti-vaxxers, and those are folks I don't want to spend much time talking about because they're just way, way too far in a different space. So I want to focus on hesitancy. And and how do we craft a narrative? How do we conduct ourselves when we have family members? And I'm dealing with that even today. I have 3 family members that I'm just like, cannot believe that we're having this conversation right now. And I'm still trying to craft a narrative that will be convincing. But the first thing that we want to be sure that we're doing is listening. Listening to people and never judging folks, especially if they're people of color. There's a reason that they have those feelings, and that reason is justified. So listening and not shaming is key. Empathizing and understanding, and putting yourself in that person's shoes about being afraid, about not knowing the long-term consequences of the vaccine, all that. Empathize, ask them questions, let them speak. Know the differences between the mRNA technology and the viral vector technology, which is the more traditional form. Because folks ask the question, what does messenger RNA, what does that mean? Well, it simply means that you're not getting the virus itself. It's like you're getting, your immune system is getting an instructions on how to create antibodies if you come in contact with the virus. And the more traditional form is just the actual weakened or disabled form of the virus. So for some people that can be helpful, just knowing the difference between the two. Provide the data, hundreds of millions of people have been vaccinated. Love to hear your thoughts about J&J and where we are with that. Engage trusted community leaders and ensure we have a workforce, those who are distributing the vaccines reflective of the communities that are being served. And then, let's all just take this as a teachable moment to reshape how we deliver care and reconceptualize how we reach and engage communities for long-term benefit. So, there's a lot that we're learning about ourselves personally, about the institutions, about healthcare, because of the pandemic, right? And it's been very catastrophic. I get it. But on the other side, there are silver linings. And I would encourage you, all of us, to think about the silver linings. What are we learning about ourselves? What are we learning about how we can deliver services so they're much more equitable from this catastrophe? So let's not let this experience go down in history in vain. Really, let's take everything that we're learning, suck it all out, and strive for a better way of doing our work. So yeah, this work is very, very difficult. This journey towards racial equity requires introspection and reflection. It requires us to be humble. It requires us to shift power and let go. And it's important for us to integrate this as a component of a long-term strategy. So I'm going to stop there, and I'd love to just hear your thoughts, your reactions, any aha moments, any personal experiences based on what I have shared with you. What did I share that you were not aware of? What's up?
I had a comment about when you mentioned people of color, especially being like having understandably having vaccine hesitancy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually talking to my sister about it, and she didn't understand why something so in the past, why I guess well, I'm Black, so Black people, why they would be hesitant about it still, because it happened to Tuskegee or Henrietta Lacks. Don't they know that there's ethical laws now that's against the law? But she didn't understand why people are still hesitant about it when it happened so long ago. But it really wasn't that long ago. So that's the thought I had when I heard you say that.
I love your point. It really wasn't that long ago. And yes, you're right. Yes, we have research guidelines now, informed consent. There's all kinds of measures that have been put in place to protect us, right? Whether we are participating in a clinical research trial ourselves, or if we are in line for a new vaccine, right? So there's lots that's been done. But the issue is the healthcare system still does not reflect the diversity of the populations that are being served, even though it's getting better. And we still have not cracked the code on how to effectively engage communities of color. Because if you look at who's leading these organizations, they are not black and brown faces. They are still typically older white males who have been doing this work for a very, very long time. I remember speaking to an older male who was on the board, and he said, I mean, he really gets it. He really, really gets it. And I was like, oh my goodness, we really need you. We need more and more of you, because we need you to talk to your peers. Because when you talk to your peers, it can be much more impactful than me talking to your peers. And so I asked him, because he asked me, what can I do? I just don't know what to do. I said, talk to your peers, please. Help your peers understand why this is so important. So then, yeah, I hear you. We still have not done our part as an industry to build trust with communities of color. And the fact that the other thing that made this an issue for, I think, for folks, and this isn't just people of color, is it all happened during a Biden administration, during the time in which we had an administration that explicitly espouse racist ideology. All this happened under his watch, on his watch. So that's another issue that needs to be addressed. Like, people don't talk about it, but it sure didn't help us. It didn't help us. So this goes back to when racism shows up, it has such an effect on so many different things in our world. And this is a perfect example. I guarantee you, well, I can't say that, that's not appropriate. I can't say that. I believe that if warp speed happened under a Biden administration, we'd have more people of color in line for the vaccine. That's my personal belief. Other thoughts? That's why you had people saying, you had a lot of Black folks saying, I'll go, but I'm not going first. I'm not going first. I can't tell you how many times I heard that. I want the vaccine, but I'm not going first. I'm going to wait for, I did my own poll with my own followers on social media, and they were like, and then they were like, I want to go, but I'm not going first. Kishel, was that you?
Yes, it was me. I was just going to say that in a lot of my other classes, because I'm a health equity concentration, we talk about the disparities between mothers when they're giving birth. So like between when race is like an indicator, when we see mothers who are giving birth, and so like the mortality aspects, we see that socioeconomic status is a factor, but it's not as significant as race when it looks at that, because even controlling for socioeconomic status, there's still that disproportionate rate of Black women dying compared to other races.
A great example. Even when we have a Black woman and a white woman on Medicaid, and I already talked about some of the challenges we have with Medicaid, you're still more likely to see the Black woman have a different outcome or different experience. And I'm not saying that happens all the time. I'm just saying it trends that way. It's trending in that direction, and that's a problem. Other thoughts, reactions? So we require students to understand, you all heard of redlining, right? Redlining, okay. So we have our health administration students actually, look at communities that have been redlined and look at readmission rates. And you can see higher readmission rates in communities that have been redlined. So, when I'm talking to leaders of organizations that have a population health strategy, I talk to them about, if you look at where people are coming from, these are communities that have been historically marginalized. What do you do about that, right? What can you do? Are you just going to keep having a revolving door and treating people once they've fallen off the cliff? Or are you really serious about population health? If you're serious about population health, you will think differently around how you organize services and who you partner with and how you deliver care. If you are interested in truly advancing the health of all the populations that you are serving, then you're going to advocate for change in the structural conditions of communities that have been historically burdened or marginalized. If you don't do that, then you will continue to see readmission rates, trends in readmission rates based on where people live, which could impact your bottom line because payment models are going more towards keeping people well, keeping people out of the hospital, preventing readmissions. That is why it's important for you to be in the game, for you to be on this journey to address racial, social injustice, because it will have an effect on your bottom line. It will also have an effect on the productivity of your employee population, many of whom are diverse. And some may live in those communities. So, yeah. Any other thoughts? So yeah, it's the right thing to do, but sometimes, some people want the business, they want to see the bottom line. How will this work impact the bottom line? And unfortunately, I have a script for that too. And so it's important for you as a health administration student, soon to be expert in this field, to be able to shift your narrative based on who you're talking to. Because if you're talking to a chief financial officer, they want to see how this work will impact their bottom line. Unfortunately, we'll need a narrative for that. And there is one. There's a business case to do this. Just like there's a business case for racial justice. Organizations are learning it every day because they're making, oops, I didn't know, I can't believe we did that. Oops, oh my gosh, how did that get out in the world? There's a business case. So, yeah. Well, I hope that this was helpful for you. Again, I think it was a very timely topic, and I'm glad that things worked out that allowed me to spend some time with you on this. And I hope that, something I said has inspired you. Something I said will help you in your own journey to navigate a very, very complicated world. And it's my hope that, it's going to help you join those of us who are on the front line to drive change in how services are delivered and how we think about healthcare and how we put an end to this cancer in our society called racism. So I'll stop here. Next steps for me, and I'll do this tomorrow because I'm exhausted tonight. I will set up in Canvas in a discussion forum the folder. Well, I'll set that up for you to drop your presentations. Your presentations should be, so we're not meeting next week, right? We're not meeting next week, so just be sure that you have your presentations in the discussion forum by 11:59 p.m. So on Tuesday, okay? And I'm hoping that this gives you a little more time to prepare and eases some of the anxiety around your presentation. Okay, all right, so reach out to me individually if you have any questions or concerns in the interim, and have a wonderful, wonderful night and a great week. Okay, okay, all right, bye-bye.